The theme of tonight's event is rewriting Proust, and so what does that phrase mean? Here's a book that's so fundamentally held together by the idea of writing that we can sort of say that, like, young Marcel and Marcel Proust, the author, are always rewriting Proust, like, the MC Escher hands that are always drawing each other in some fashion. But I think more interestingly, in 1919, Proust published a volume called Pastiche et Mélange, which was a sort of study of literary style in a particular method that was bizarre, but at the center of it is a text called the Le Moine Affair. And for context, the Le Moine Affair was a De Beers scandal where someone fooled a bunch of investors into thinking that he could synthesize diamonds, and the story was like wildfire in France. And so Proust took it and he rewrote it in the style of, he did several pastiches. He rewrote it in the style of, Balzac, Flaubert, Saint-Simon, real, sort of people who shape French literature. And so my question, I think the first thing I'd like to start with is, with this idea in mind, sort of starting with Charles, you who sort of focused on the idea of the literary masterpiece. What do you think what we can learn, sort of as writers and readers, from any sort of manipulation of a work of literary significance, like à la recherche?
Well, for once I would say that I'm not Proustian, not more than he himself was a Bergsonian, after Bergson, the philosopher, who was a specialist of memory, whom he read all along, but that's not because he read Bergson that he was a Bergsonian. So all of us here are not Proustian, I would say, and I'm sure we are not, because we have read Proust. Before rewriting Proust, we have hopefully reread Proust. And in fact, what you say, the writing of pastiche is a very interesting way not to become a Proustian or an imitator of any writer. That's what I learned myself the first time I read this. It is a method, by the way. If you don't want to be contaminated by Proust, because it's no use to rewrite Proust since Proust existed. So the only way not to be contaminated, he's so profound a writer, so influential, that the best way is to write pastiche, which I did myself in this book that you mentioned before, Le Grand Livre de Proust. I wrote a pastiche of Proust. And in fact, it's a pastiche of the end of the novel, where everyone discovers that, where the narrator discovers that everyone has become very old and he doesn't recognize anyone. And in my pastiche, it's exactly the same thing. The narrator arrives and he doesn't recognize anyone because of plastic surgery, in modern times. So, apart from that, the writing pastiche is the best way to penetrate oneself with the style of an author and not to redo what he done himself. That's the best way not to rewrite is to rewrite. Is
Daniel?
What do you think? Well, so to answer that, I come from a very different tradition, which is the Ulipo, just for general context, is this French-based group that started in 1960, whose collective project is to explore the potential of literature through mathematical and linguistic structures. And a lot of the Ulipo's exploration is rooted in pastiche, but not so much for authorial reasons.
That's unreal.
Yeah.
Oh, you know who's fault it was. Please.
I think the purpose of pastiche, or experimenting with a text in the Ulipian approach, is sort of to poke and prod at it to see what it's actually made of and how strong it is and what it can withstand. How best to put this? Basically, if you think of a text as if a novel is not something that just emerged fully formed from the intellect of the author, but something that took a lot of work and creative inspiration and strategy and structure and opening the hood, if you like, and tinkering with the engine and seeing how you can, if you change one thing, if you were, for instance, to delete a character from Proust, how would the novel close around it? And that's, not to get too far into it, but there's a novel by a member of the Ulipo named Anne Garreta, which is called La Décomposition, whose narrator is a psychopath, to find a point on it, who essentially goes around murdering people at random by assigning each of them a character from La Recherche, and every time the narrator successfully kills somebody, returns to the novel and deletes every sentence from Proust with that character in it. So that's, it'd be grim to call that a pastiche, I suppose, but to experiment with the text as something fully formed and see what it can stand up to is, I think, the value for the Eulipian.
Yeah.
What a good idea to start with the pastiche. As you all know, it's an Italian word and it means pasticcio, a mix of everything. But what interests me at least is to see what Proust wrote before writing pastiche. And he actually wrote three things before he got to pastiche and to pastiching in the Affaire Le Moine, as you reminded us. First of all, he tried a collection of essays which is called Les Plaisirs et les Jours, which was illustrated by Madeleine Lemaire, with music by Reynaldo Hahn, and with a preface by Anatole France. Right away, he became Le Petit Marcel, a dilettante, an écrivain de salon. Then he started working on a novel, Jean Santeuil, which he never finished. And then he translated Ruskin. And then finally, he got to pastiching everybody else. And my theory, it's only a theory, is that he had to prove that he could write like Renan, like Saint-Simon, like everybody else, until he could start writing as he would write, until he found his own voice with À la recherche du temps perdu, and it is a scoop, we just discovered that he did not start in 1908, but in 1906. You can imagine what it means to us. That 2 years before we thought he did start.
Can I say something? In fact, he was very lazy because he did not translate Ruskin. His mother did. He made his mother translate Ruskin, and then he rewrote in better French what his mother did. That was mother or.
We have some disagreement.
Well,
So we have a disagreement over here.
No, it's a fact. It's a fact. Madame Proust translated Ruskin for him, and because he didn't speak English very well, so and she did, and then he puts it in better French. So we have two writers there, and in fact he was a very, how would I say, progressive writer. In La Recherche, he says about Alfred de Musset, the romantic poet, he says, jour après jour, étape après étape, il s'élève de ses mauvais poèmes aux nuits, which is day after day, step by step, he climbs to the better poems he wrote. And in fact, I think Proust was talking about himself, because he's not a sudden genius appearing, I would say. C'est un travailleur.
Well, if I may go on. Proust said, I do not speak English, but I speak Ruskin. And it's true that his mother helped him, and Marie Nordlinger and a few other. It was a collective work. So I just.
That's the only point in common they have with Gide, apart from the refus of the novel at Gallimard by Gide. Gide translated Goethe first, but he didn't translate Goethe. It's someone else who translated Goethe. So, in fact, all French literature is a fake.
It's possible. No, but obviously Proust has been rewritten extensively. In some form or another, grim or not, unless. But and you have sort of created, especially with the murder mystery novel, and in this, but you've created a whole second extended Proust universe, and you're having an artist, or you're working on and you're working with Stéphane Huet to adapt sort of Proust into a novel for children. And so my question is, what is it about Proust's work that not only lends itself so well to these tinkerings and exercises, or even full, complete works, but what about Proust do you think sort of tempts adaptation in this way?
Because there's a little bit of everything for everyone in Proust. So, you know, you can twist it the way you want and use it the way you want. But interestingly, the first title of my novel, Meurtre chez Tante Léonie, and it was clear that it could not happen since Léonie is not a person but a character, was Meurtre pastiche. That's how I called it first. And then it became Meurtre chez Tante Léonie, so that it would be clear that it could not happen. It was pure fiction. Also, somebody wanted to, you know, recognize herself and was not happy with the fiction of the character.
I think it's perfectly possible to murder a character. It just takes imagination.
I do.
As demonstrated by the novel that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Sociopathic imagination or otherwise.
Or lack of imagination, because I think it was like one of the most flat-footed comments I've ever read. But like Cormac McCarthy said that he didn't like Proust because nobody dies, which is maybe the dumbest thing ever said in the history of books. Yeah, and not true.
That's the history of Mendelssohn directing Mozart in Vienna, and at the end of the concert an old lady comes and says to Mendelssohn, "Oh, your directing was wonderful, but I must say that I don't like Mozart at all." And Mendelssohn answered, "It has no importance, madame."
Well, I mean, Daniel, what do you think, sort of, what, especially with a work like Proust, what do you think, you know, in a strange way, seduces eager or overzealous, or maybe even equipped, well-equipped writers into adapting it or rewriting it?
I agree with what Elyane said. I think it's sort of, it has something for everyone. It's a work of such ambition and such truth, I guess. It taps into things that everyone can relate to, which is ironic because of how specific and how elaborately wrought it is character-wise. But for the would-be experimentalist, for the writer who wants to tinker, I think it's, as texts go, it's a really good fruit fly. It's a species that has everything, and you can take something out and see what happens, or you can add something and see what happens, and it's just a very robust example of a modern novel.
Well, to stick to our subject, the first one to rewrite Proust was Proust himself, because as we know, he kept on rewriting his own manuscript. And most interesting is that he did not pastiche himself, which was not very easy, an easy thing to do, because he has such a strong style that he could have become a clown of himself, I think. And, you know, so he kept on rewriting his own manuscript. We know the manuscripts. They are full of ajouts and what he called paroles, which are pieces of papers he scotched, how would you say that? Scotched to the manuscript. But, so he added Proust to Proust. That's what we know. And what we don't know, or don't know very well, is that in the end he cut himself. We have a version of Albertine Disparue, which was discovered in 1983, which is two-thirds shorter than the version that he himself published. So he knew in the end that he had to cut himself. The danger of being Proust is that you do not end. You know, I think that if I may quote myself, I said that reading Proust is just like cross the ocean, and he is the ocean, so he's a never-ending writer. And the proof of his genius is that he stopped, he cut himself, I think. And he couldn't, he managed not to pastiche himself. Would you say that?
Yeah. I mean, if we look at pastiche for a second and don't look at it as an exercise itself, but as sort of the beginning of something, an internalized system that inspires, I guess, in a perhaps more latent manner, rewriting in that sense. Or I guess the more banal fawning, saying, you know, because Proust did everything, aren't we all sort of always rewriting Proust? You know, what hasn't he done? How do you think Proust or à la recherche has informed you, the work you do, or shaped it?
Well, could I go back slightly?
No.
What shaped my reading of Proust that two things. First of all, it was a book which was forbidden for me because my father told me that it was not pour les jeunes filles.
Come on.
He said that.
À l'ombre de jeunes filles en fleurs.
I told him, À l'ombre de jeunes filles en fleurs. This is a wonderful title. It's not for me. And he said, no, it's not for you. So, you know, I was a very dutiful daughter, and I didn't read it until I was 18. So it was a forbidden book. It was in the library, but I couldn't touch it. But anyway. And then the second thing is that I worked on the manuscripts. So it took me about a year to learn how to read Proust writing first. You know, you have to be trained. And then writing on the manuscript is a way of desacralizing the text, because then, you know, you see all the mistakes, all the defaults of the work, but it is still beautiful because it is unfinished, and it's very clear when you look into the manuscripts. And that's how I got in contact with the text first.
I mean, would you say desacralizing or engaging with? I don't know.
I don't know, I was working with a team of scholars, and sometimes somebody would say, oh, Marcel, écoute, c'est pas possible. You know, we have this kind of relationship. That's how it was.
Okay, so it's intimate, okay.
Yeah.
I guess, you know, same question for you. You know, how has sort of thinking about Proust helped you write?
Just picking from the cloud full of possible answers, I think. What I'll call the reliable, unreliable narrator, I think, was something that Proust did particularly well, where, you know, from a superficial reading, the character is the author, or the protagonist, or any character is the author, and yet there are these light differences that, because of the proximity to your own biography, is in a way kind of more titillating for the reader, more intriguing in the ways that it doesn't overlap. I think that's been helpful to me in my occasional grapplings with fiction that sometimes wants to be autobiographical but doesn't want to be autobiographical at the same time.
Sean?
The first time I read Proust, I didn't, I would say, understand what he wrote. I read the novel at length, and I understood it was about a young boy who couldn't go to sleep, who then became a snob and blah blah blah. I got that, but I didn't get the point. It was a very opaque novel to me, and then it's only the second time that all the blurriness went out, and it was really the discovery of the moon or a new planet, because I think that great novels are planets added to the other planets. You have the moon, you have Mars, you have Jupiter, and you have Marcel Proust and some others. So it's a discovery to be made, and it's a long discovery. Then when I read, I have the habit to read excuse me, a volume of Proust every year, every summer usually. I pick one and I reread a volume of La Recherche. And the difficult thing is it's a struggle with between him and me, because I don't want to be, since I'm a writer, I must take great care of not being a Proustian writer, as I said. On the other hand, a journalist, very often French journalists ask you, oh, isn't it difficult to be a writer after Proust? Then usually I laugh, because it's a silly question. You know, when you read Proust and people like that, it's a struggle, but it's a good struggle, because he's so inspiring that when we read Proust, first of all, we become Proust. We are Proust ourselves when we read Proust. So a reader of Proust is a genius himself. And then after I don't, it's true. We are geniuses when we read Proust. The difficulty is after Proust, when we cease to be geniuses. So, but reading Proust nous donne envie. Makes us want to become geniuses. So that's the great morality of this writer who has been called immoral, I would say.
I'm gonna, I guess Daniel will speak about it for, briefly for a minute. But Georges Perec, who is a member of the Ulipo, specifically wrote Proust. He took the first sentence and he rewrote it. Was sort of, I guess, under the idea of what the Ulipo does, which is work with a bizarre set of, I mean bizarre, not a pejorative way, but in an unusual set of constraints. And so he, turned it into different styles of writing and removed certain letters from the whole sentence and did it, I think, 30-some times. And if you could just briefly, I guess, describe it better than I can.
Sure. I can describe it equally well. I think it was 1975, as we discussed earlier. Perec just took the first sentence, "Longtemps je me suis couché de bonheur," and to keep the fruit fly metaphor, submitted it to, I think, 35 variations, 35 experiments. And so, for instance, would remove one letter or change a letter. So probably the easiest example is to, instead of "Longtemps je me suis couché de bonheur," would became "Je me suis bouché," "Je me suis douché," "Je me suis mouché," and then finally the inevitable "Je me suis touché," which mean respectively, for a long time, the basic sentence is, for a long time I used to go to bed early, and she changed to, for a long time I used to blow my nose early, I used to take a shower early, I used to touch myself early. And so on from there. He rewrote the first sentence as an anagram, as a palindrome, as an Alexandrian, and as something called snowball, where it's a series of words. Each word has one more letter than the previous word. And at one point in the middle, he just says, like, another perspective, which is "Marcel, au lit," or "Marcel, go to bed." And that's the summary. I don't know if you have more specific questions.
Well, I mean, sort of, when Proust did the Le Moine affair, he called it, literary criticism in action. It was sort of a way of sticking your fingers in it and really doing it, as opposed to, I don't know. I mean, obviously, Anyway, so, but the thing is, like, do you ever think that something like what Perec did, or what Proust did with Le Moine, can ever be a genuine form of literary criticism?
Sure.
I mean, how do you?
If you want to answer that first, I'm all over that for a minute. I think it's a perfectly genuine way of. There's some people for whom writing is a form of reading, and a form of digestion. And I think Perec and Proust may not be the perfect example, because Perec was certainly very influenced by Proust in a lot of ways, but as much as an example of what he didn't want to accomplish as of what he did want to accomplish. But I think, just especially in light of what Charles said earlier, sort of putting yourself in a text and critiquing it by playing around in it, sticking your finger in and swirling it around and seeing, I guess, where you end and the text begins. I think that's a very basic goal of what most criticism should be.
Just remember that Proust wrote the same sentence, the first sentence, "Longtemps je me suis couché de bonheur," 16 times before he got it right.
That's still only 20 fewer than Perec. So,
that's right.
What do you think? I mean, do you think that sort of this idea of literary criticism in action is do you think it holds? Do you think it's real? Do you think that it is a valid form, like what Becker did with Proust did with Le Moine, rewriting in this way? Do you think it's a form of literary criticism, an effective one?
I really think that it depends on how you define literary criticism.
Let's think about that for a second, really quickly.
But tell me what you think. What is literary criticism to you guys?
What is
writing a good novel?
Oh, okay. Well, then you have your answer.
All right. Well, I mean, when you adapt anything, you sort of, there's the question is, how do you maintain a sense of integrity? And I think the better question is, like, what is a sense of integrity to a work of art? Like, what is integrity to the masterpiece, do you think?
Well, the first critic is the writer, is the novelist, and Proust was. We must not exaggerate the pastiche. The pastiche was a funny thing, but I think that most often le pastiche are more parodies than pastiche, because in fact it gets to the subjects and not to the styles, more than to the styles of the writers he is supposed to pastiche. When he is pastiching Balzac in L'Affaire Lemoine, in reality he's pastiching the idiosyncrasies of Balzac, but in terms of subject. It's all about the French industry, where he describes a gown, a woman wearing a gown in his pastiche, and it, in fact, is not in the style of Balzac, but after the ideas of Balzac. It's about, and the sentence goes, et cette fine fleur de l'industrie française qui avait produit cette robe d'une cotonnade merveilleuse, which is an idea of Balzac, not the style of Balzac, I would say. And in fact, Proust was a great critic. One of the best pieces of critique we can find in the 20th century is an essay he wrote on Flaubert, which is called À propos du style de Flaubert. And the analysis of the style de Flaubert is a great piece of literary criticism that I think only a writer himself can do, because he's deeply in style and into style. The way he described the way that Flaubert himself has to begin sentences by the word "et," and it's a masterpiece by itself. And he couldn't write what he wrote as a novelist if he hadn't that finesse in matter of style, I would say. So that's it.